Hey neighbor, thanks for tuning in to another episode of my weekly countdown show, 7 on Sunday. Tough subject on the chalkboard today, class. We're going to be talking about bands that are widely considered to be rip-offs. A subject that's bound to bring up loads of accusations in the comments, and before we even get going, keep it civil down there. This isn't the Wild West. Rip-off bands accused of stealing their sound from someone else isn't a new concept at all. In fact, it dates back to some of the now classic rock bands that newer generations are blasting for being unoriginal. Imitation may be the sincerest form of flattery, but is it the quickest way to the top of the charts? Let's judge the fate of these alleged knockoffs. Alright, somebody said the word judge, so order in the court. This whole court is out of order. Judge Johnny presiding. I've seen a lot of talk about rip-offs, and I just want to say, Judge Judy, you gotta stop stepping on my style. I was clearly here first. I mean, how long are we gonna play this game? Anyways, along the way, I'll give you some of the facts, add in some of my own personal opinion, because surprise, surprise, I actually like most of the bands on here. And we'll go from there to see if they've actually made a name of their own, or if they'll forever live in another band's shadow. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and without further ado, here's number 7.
Think my heart behind is bleeding, but still my pride is screaming. My future will listen to me, listen to me.
Clearing the air as we get started, let's knock off an easy one that really doesn't hold much merit to the argument. One that very clearly evolved quicker than we could have ever given them credit for. The name of the band is Half Alive, and the band they were accused of ripping off is the popular alternative and indie-tronica duo 21 Pilots. Half Alive are a musical trio that definitely do have some similarities to T.O.P., and the song that sparked an initial wave of internet hatred towards the California band was Tiptoes from their first EP. While the Click fandom has since welcomed their style as they've grown in popularity, claiming that they've always wanted more groups like 21 Pilots, the initial reception blasted them as cheap knockoffs riding the wave of their success. The similarities in Tiptoes are the most alarming moment of copycat syndrome in Half Alive's catalog. Even the other songs on that debut EP aren't that close to their sound, but it does exist as evidence that 21 Pilots made a massive impact on the world after the release of Blurry Face. Half Alive pressed on after the initial backlash, crafting their now viral song and music video for Still Feel, a buzzing gem that set them apart in a much bigger way as they showcased their indie pop and rock tendencies. Can I still hear a bit of Tyler Joseph and their frontman Josh Taylor? Yes, but at this point, there's more that separates them now as he's learned to deliver his vocals in a much more unique way. If you were a part of online music forums in the early 2000s, all you'd hear is chatter about how this British rock band Muse were ripping off another British rock band, Radiohead. I mean, that's at least what I've been told. I wasn't there. I didn't even have a computer in my house until 2003. Setting aside my technological blunders at that time, you've probably been living under a sheltered rock in the Muse subreddit if you've never heard the lads negatively compared to Radiohead, the latter of which obviously debuted first as they left a super massive impression on a large number of bands and groups in the years that followed. Muse's frontman Matthew Bellamy has an authoritative voice that instantly draws your attention, and what people couldn't seem to get over on the first 2 records especially was his trademark high-pitched roar that could drop back down to a subtle coo at the drop of a hat. Where did he learn this wondrous trick? Well, it's pretty obvious at this point that you can thank Radiohead for this band even existing in the first place, but I'll be damned if I'm not sick of the endless comparisons, as so many music fans and publications pretend like Muse didn't carve out their own lane in due time, like there's some sort of beached whale out here soaking up everybody else's sunlight, ruining their good time. At this point, their initial dark pensive moods have swung in a different direction entirely, first noted on the wide-reaching effort Black Holes and Revelations. You could probably argue that Absolution had already covered up most of the footsteps of Radiohead still left in the mix, and I would agree with that, but Black Holes was the major pivot that should silence the naysayers if they actually give it the time of day. They definitely have some politics in common along with the vocal ranges of Matt Bellamy and Tom York, and of course they're both British, and many of the early riff patterns were reminiscent of the masterpiece OK Computer, yet here Muse stand all these years later as one of the most accomplished groups of the 21st century worldwide. Listen, those of you who aren't all that impressed by their debut, I'm with you, but give Origin of Symmetry another chance. They went on a strong run during the 2000s as they improved as songwriters and musicians, and while they've always had a bit of cheesiness to their sound, and while they're by no means poets, I think there's touches of self-awareness there that make it all worthwhile in the end.
You would not believe your eyes if 10 million fireflies
Owl City's good, clean Christian family fun for the whole family spread like a wildfire in 2009, garnering him a massive fan base beyond that of just his initial MySpace following he'd already attracted. I was super early to the Adam Young party, something about his dreamy sound just really lured me in, but I was also already a fan of the Postal Service prior to this discovery, something that I didn't even think about twice until years later. Ben Gibbard of Death Cab for Cutie's side project, the Postal Service, are considered gods among men in the indie scene, like people will bow down to shrines of them at night, even though they only released one album, Give Up, in 2003. Indeed, it featured much of the dreamy, drippy atmosphere that you'd find in 99% of Owl City's song, stuffed full of glitchy synths, dreary vocals, and that dynamic of a male and female vocalist. I guess to put it politely, you could say that Owl City is like a B-grade Postal Service in comparison, with frequent collaborator Brienne Duran being to Adam what Jenny Lewis was to Ben Gibbard. Fans of the Postal Service hit their tipping point when Adam did an interview in 2009 when he was asked about the influence of the band in his music, where he replied saying that he wasn't really all that familiar and that he was personally more of a fan of Death Cab for Cutie. Sure, Jan, but uh-oh, Adam, there was strike 1, but strike 2 and 3 happened all at once as he shoved his foot straight into his mouth by commenting that I think Give Up left everyone asking, what are they gonna do next? Since no one else has done anything quite like it, it's almost like everyone is saying naturally that this is going to be the next step. Maybe that's me, maybe that's this record. Yikes, that's what he said about Ocean Eyes in 2009. Maybe that's a question that he should have left off the table since that left his reputation fractured among many communities then, and even to this day, I personally don't think it was 100% Adam's intention to copy and paste their ideas, but then again, it's hard not to hear Postal Service member Jimmy Tamborello's production techniques at play in the first few Owl City albums.
Bitch, just a kiss on the lips and I was on my knees. I wait and give me.
Largely considered to be one of the most unoriginal groups of all time, Australian rockers Jet were accused of copying the songwriting formulas of AC/DC, the Beatles, Iggy Pop, and hell, pretty much any other significant rock group that launched between the 60s and the 80s you can think of. Despite all of this, they somehow rode a wave of success in the early to mid 2000s with their albums Get Born and the less successful but still popular Shine On. With over 6 million records sold worldwide, it's hard to say that they were some sort of massive flop everyone laughed off because you know you've at least heard one of their hit songs at some point in your life. In fact, you probably had them on your iPod. There's simply not much defending to do for Jet, and when they called it quits in 2013, I thought that everyone in the world pretty much just agreed that their time was up, and at least they had the decency to call it a day. Well, apparently someone somewhere, a Karen out there in the audience said, please say psych, and Jet heard you. I'm holding you personally responsible, Karen, because as of 2016, something I never would have known about unless I had Googled it for this video, Jet are back. Sometimes you gotta be a little bit more self-aware and know when you're nothing more than a product of your time. And in the early 2000s, people must have been desperate for a bland, by-the-numbers rock and roll group that tried to do ballads like the Beatles and hard rockers like AC/DC. However, much like the trajectory of a flight, Jet took off and flew close to the sun above the clouds for their 15 minutes of fame, but the descent back down happened rapidly, and the landing on the airstrip pretty much destroyed the landing gear. Once heralded as the next big band to come out of the New York music scene, the Bravery give us quite the opposite of the feeling of the last band Jet. They had heart, their instrumentals were strong, and their hooks had charm, but their lasting stain on the reputation was a quote from the Killers frontman Brandon Flowers, where he pegged them as a desperate indie act riding on the coattails of their success. That hurts to hear, even though it could be considered true with their synth rock debut album, but most groups get their start because they found a sound that inspired them, and they tried to take a stab at doing it on their own. If we didn't give groups a chance to evolve and carve out their own niche lane, then we'd be denying some of the greatest to ever do it. Beyond a few similarities musically, I really believe the Bravery deserved a whole lot better than the hand they were dealt. Their sophomore album, The Sun and the Moon, is a really good record, and even their final oddity, Stir the Blood, was an interesting Molotov cocktail of hatred and sunshine. The Killers have consistently been a fantastic group, and those comments were made a long time ago, and while I can't say for sure what led to the breakup of the Bravery, I think it's important to acknowledge the talents of both groups. In 1992, Alice in Chains released their debut album Dirt, which went on to become one of the most beloved albums of the grunge music era. On that very album, they placed a song called Godsmack, and just a few short years later, 1995 rolls around and we have to deal with these absolute boneheads that named their band Godsmack.
So, the name Godsmack, how did you guys come up with that name? We stole it.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. These rough and tough guys have admitted to stealing their name from an Alice in Chains song. But don't let their self-awareness fool you. They took way more than just a song name when it comes to the legendary band. Godsmack released their debut self-titled album in 1998, and it was clear from the get-go that these testosterone overloads didn't have an ounce of originality in them bones. Hey Sully Erna, have you considered not singing like the legendary Lane Staley while simultaneously bringing in producers that made all of your early albums sound like desperate post-grunge cash grabs? No? Well, fuck me then, because somehow against all the odds, this band are wildly successful. It wasn't just the late 90s for this band. I heard their songs all over rock radio while growing up in the 2000s, and even back then, I couldn't stand the overly macho aggression I was hearing. See, the biggest difference between Godsmack and Alice in Chains is the talent behind the machine. If you lift the hood of Godsmack, all you're gonna see is a group of men grunting like and attempting to stomp their foot on the gas pedal, whereas Alice in Chains runs like a well-oiled muscle car with each member serving as a talented member of the pit crew. Godsmack are one of the main rip-off bands that I can't stand, and clearly I've come into this argument guns blazing anti-Godsmack all the way, so forgive my impartial tone, but I can't stand to see a group like them walking around so arrogantly with so much confidence without ever properly crediting the legends that came before them. No, I'm not talking about their toaster full of ass record When Legends Rise. I'm talking about Sully Erna straight up patting himself on the back for coming up with their totally original metal meets post-grunge and hard rock sound. Excuse me while I roll my eyes straight to the back of my head. Topping the list today is one that most of you probably saw coming from like a mile away, but I can't think of another band that's generated this amount of buzz, both good and bad, in the past 20 years. Greta Van Fleet is the name of this young rock and roll band, and Led Zeppelin are of course the band they're accused of ripping off. Before we go any further, let the record show that Led Zeppelin aren't an entirely original band themselves. For years, the group faced criticisms of plagiarism and building their sound off of the back of something they didn't create, and to an extent, it's true, even if Zepp are one of my favorite classic rock groups. As the saying goes, if they had a problem with Greta Van Fleet, wouldn't that be a little bit like the pot calling the kettle black? The Zeppelin worship found on Greta Van Fleet's material is obvious. Anyone who's listened to Highway Tune or Black Smoke Rising could tell you that, and by the amount of headlines flying in like a fucking frenzy about them during that time, I can guarantee that most of you watching this video have at least heard a song or two by them out of morbid curiosity. I made a video reacting to their songs for the first time a couple of years ago, and I actually really enjoyed a lot of what I was hearing. It's not entirely fresh or original, and I definitely wouldn't go as far as to say that they've done anything that would put them in the history books forever, but they've got a hell of a lot of charisma as a unit, and there's genuine talent, passion, and bravado to the music that makes them a little bit hard to dislike. Whereas many music outlets take pleasure in smacking them around like they're clowns at a boxing ring, I'm gonna have to give them the benefit of the doubt since a lot of their songs truly do show promise beyond that of just a singular Zeppelin obsession. Frontman Josh Kiska certainly flexes his towering Robert Plant-like range on some of their most popular tunes, but then again, some of the highlights on their debut album Anthem of the Peaceful Army showed that he and the other guys were making strides to slowly evolve without alienating their fanbase. If you're not into their sound and you find them to be too derivative of Zeppelin, Stevie Ray Vaughan, or other legacy acts, you're not wrong in voicing that opinion. Their music is not going to be for everyone. The modern hippies and Greta Van Fleet may have replicated the sound and outfits in an obvious way, but I do think that their display of talent along with their hopeful message they spread aiming for peace and care for the environment deserves a little bit more love. What bands out there do you think are entirely unoriginal or rip off another band's sound? What bands actually got their start that way and evolved into something else? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, along with any of the ones that I discussed in this video, and if you want to see a part 2 sometime in the future, then let me know by dropping a like on the video. To everyone that stuck around for the outro, thank you so much. You are my #1 fans out there. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't done so already. If you want to see the last episode of SOS, then tap this card right here, or tap that video right here to see me react to Greta Van Fleet for the first time. All of my socials can be found in the description down below, including my Patreon, and I'll see you soon for more on ARTV.